Welcome. I think we're going to call this tape, this VidDevo, Magna Garden Cottage, because that's what I call my house where I live. And what I'm sitting at right now is a chair that's on my front, you could say porch, though it's really elevated upward, kind of like raised it about 4 feet high and covered it with artificial turf. And then around the outer perimeter of that, I laid some wood so we could put chairs and sit and put plants and have kind of a firmer foundation than just the artificial grass. And then around that is, on the front facade, is kind of a brick staircase going down that has, what do we call them? Different levels of the garden going downward. There's no fence. It goes down to the sidewalk, and then on the opposite side of the sidewalk is a berm, or garden, you could say, and I call them berms. And here, where I'm sitting, is surrounded by trees. I have Russian elms, I have hybrid willows, and a couple other trees. I don't know what they are, but they're really pretty. And they've grown up since I moved here. And what I've done was to create a space in a place that seemed to be very, I don't know, kind of, this is like my sanctuary, you could say, or my oasis in the midst of a dry and weary land, which is kind of what it was. It was pretty messed up when I moved in. And there were a lot of families and generations and people coming and going, and kind of old town effect, you know, an old city. And then it grew, and then it exploded, and now it is what it is. And that's Magna, where I live. And I live in Magna, Utah. I'm not Mormon. Never have been, never will be. No offense to the Mormons, you know. You go do your thing. I hope you find Jesus. But I wanted to actually take this VidDevo and maybe do a little bit on the property itself, you know, the foundation of where I'm doing my videos, and maybe show off some of it, not to be vain or weird or to make it kind of unusual, but rather to make it more obvious that there's some things going on around me that you might hear, or you might have a taste of, or you might see, like my wife come visit me. And it might explain it better if I could show, for instance, like my water fountains. You know, that's one of the kind of nice things that I've done, is built some water fountains that are always in the stage of being made better. And I like them. You see, we originally, when we first moved in, we had a bird bath, and we saw somebody else's bird bath, and birds were sort of trying to take a bath, and it didn't work so well for them. So I kind of came up with an idea that, hey, maybe we should build one for the birds. And I kind of got bird-brained about it, and so now we have a pond at the bottom, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 levels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, with a pond down below. And the birds, every day, the little birds, you know, like the chickadees and the finches and the sparrows, and maybe some robins every now and then, and a blackbird, they'll come and they'll sip and drink from these ponds, these little, you know, stepladder ponds going down in the waterfall. But what's even better is that they'll, especially at this one, they'll stop and take a bath. And those birds, they go nuts in it. I mean, they dive in it, they splash themselves, they stay in it for good 2 or 3 minutes, you know, just drowning themselves. I mean, I've seen birds take baths in little tiny ponds. I've seen bird baths where they just kind of sort of splash a little bit. I've never seen them like act like this is a hot tub. And that's kind of what they've been doing since I put that up. But then also I'm standing a little bit high up compared to the street level. And I like that because I didn't want to be interrupted constantly by someone walking up to me and trying to make some conversation because they happen to be walking down the street. And that was a habit of the residents here in Magna. And I was more into, I'm working, I'm working on my garden. I'm planting flowers. I'm building waterfalls. I have 2 or 3 other waterfalls. And the reason behind it, Magna Garden Cottage, was really to fulfill a scripture that God gave me, which was, He passes through the valley of Becca and makes it a fountain, and that was kind of what the Lord gave me when I first prayed about purchasing this property, and kind of like, well, I didn't really want to own anything at the end of my days, because I always thought that, better to divest yourself of attachments than to be invested in things that might be debt ridden and cause you, maybe, who knows, miss the rapture or something. You always want to be a little more freer to go than it is to stay. And weirdly so, we kind of bought this, and then it wound up land boom. Property became worth 10 times more than the house, and suddenly we had equity, and we had also a loan that was so cheap it was cheaper than rent. Praise the Lord. That's Magna Garden Cottage. But there are other parts of it that I wanted to show and to highlight in this video about how God has blessed me and my wife in allowing us to do this at the end of our life. Because we both have been faithful to do lots of things in our life at different times. I remember my wife going with me to help out this church that we were planting, and we wound up, giving up our apartment, going, and we wound up taking care of 2 churches that the pastor decided to run. There were one, an old antique church that he was restoring, and it was beautiful, it was gorgeous, it was old, and it was like, had been around, and it was out by the farmland. Then there was another one, a modern one, kind of, that was like a Pentecostal kind of building, sort of. And it was like in town, and so my wife and I, both of us, she would work, but then on weekends we worked for, technically, the ministry. We would set up one church, the sound system and the pews and the chairs and everything. Then we'd pick up the sound system and haul it over to the other church and set that up and have a service there too. That was a lot. The pastor was an unusual character that I knew from back in Oregon. And yeah, that's kind of the way it worked out. Unusual and pretty characteristic of what God may have done in ministering to him more than to the people that might have been looking for or being ministered to by God himself through the pastor. And it was an interesting time, but God blessed my wife for being faithful to following me to do this, because I'm used to helping out in weird, bizarre circumstances and situations. I've gone around, well, not around the world, I've gone overseas to Israel, I've been in Mexico, and I've been, pretty much different states of the United States. And I always liked being behind the scenes because it was easier than dealing with politics or emotions or people in varying degrees and varying stages of life as they were maturing in their faith. It was interesting for me, to have to finally realize one day that I'm an elder. I'm old in the faith. I know a lot. And I've applied a lot. I didn't know that. I really kind of thought that, all these guys, whoever, come running up with a title and a badge, or however you want to look at it when you talk about ministers, were always smarter than I was and better than I was, and they had more going for them. Well, you find out eventually with the Lord, he don't care. He uses what he uses and he loses what he loses, and he doesn't care because he'll take care to do what he chooses to do with wherever, whomever, whenever, and however he chooses to do it. By the way, this I wanted to show you was my little froggy waterfall. That's what that looks like, and it runs down to there over the rocks and into the pond. And then currently we got a whole bunch of these containers that we're winding up putting a lot of vegetables and flowers. The painted ones have flowers. The pots have vegetables. And they're being started out front. And then the normal ground level will have flowers and bulbs, and the bulbs have already come up so far this spring. And there's a lot being always constantly developed and grown in larger degree as much as I have time to develop them. And then people come by and they'll walk and they'll say, "Ah, love your house." I mean, I haven't heard anybody say they hated it. I guess that would be kind of rude, wouldn't it? But, you know, different people have said that they love it because they see all the trees. See the skyline? I love it because it gets 100 degrees here and I'm under the shade. And, you know, we have like on each 4 post, we have a corner lamppost. Because I always think of Chronicles of Narnia. And you can see farther down the way, there's another one down by the waterfall. And then I'm going in the back, you know, I have kind of these staggered planters, and then trees growing in between them and flowers growing in between them. And then on the back deck, I have my kayaks and other projects. And then back there, where it's all kind of torn apart, is a greenhouse that's going in. Sort of. Working on it. And then I also built a memorial to the people that died. You know, I don't have the plaque anymore up, but one of the greatest tragedies I think that happened in life was that coronavirus hit, and I don't think we were ready for it, America itself. I am pretty sure medicine wasn't ready for it. And when you think about how many people were infected and then taken away from their families and their loved ones, brought to a hospital and not allowed to see or visit or have visitation from their family members, and they died on a respirator, you know, that just hurt me, you know. So I built this memorial, and there's a fountain that goes, you know, and I kind of devoted it to coronavirus, and it's been here for maybe about 7 years. You know, been here in the house about 7 years. And I've been gradually building this up and having it develop and having it grow and having it be changed almost yearly. Almost every year you could see a difference of something that I've been working on or something that I got an idea for. And what I told the Lord was that, you know, if I'm going to live long enough to see you return, if you're going to keep me around that long, then I need something to keep me busy, because otherwise I'll get myself into trouble. And so I need a house that would always be beyond my reach, that would extend out beyond what I'm able to do. And so me and God, we created it. We have a lot of these trees, and then we have Christmas trees. Yes, those are Christmas trees. They're artificial. So are a lot of the flowers that you see, because I mix artificial in with flowering, with real flowers. And it's beautiful. But it's not only beautiful in the summer and spring, it's beautiful in the winter and fall. So I love it. And then at night, I have some of the trees lit up. Like you could see just barely a light shining on that one tree there. Starting to get dark enough to see the lights. And I wanted to do this because I didn't want people going in the yard, but I wanted them to enjoy the sides. So I put up flags, a lot of them Christian, and then every holiday I try to put up holiday flags. And I try to inspire people with what I'm doing. I'm not doing it to be rich, because obviously everything I've done here has been free. I mean, bottom line is that we didn't pay for anything. All the bricks, all the dirt, everything we get is free. You know, we just look at the ads that are out there and, you know, classified and Facebook Marketplace, and they say free, I go get it. You know, and haul it back to the house and try to make use of it. And it's been pretty awesome that way. You know, I've been able to make that applicable to my garden and to my yard. And this is like I just barely started it this year, but this is kind of like a walkway going up to my covered bridge. I did have to buy that bridge, but that's because I had a fountain and a waterfall already in the background. Now I changed the waterfall in the back, but it's supposed to be like, you could see the water tumbling down some rocks back there, and it's supposed to go all the way forward to this edge. And it will once I get more free flagstones, because God provides. I mean, that's kind of a testimony of what God has done. I mean, they say, look at the house that Jack built. Well, a lot of people know me for working on my house, but they don't know me as far as that God provided all these things. And he is the one who really has given me the ability and the strength, the patience, the endurance, the confidence to try things, to make them work, to apply them to my life and my yard, and then to watch as he adds the increase, the birds. The birds are a miracle for me. I mean, Jesus said, you know, that, you know, foxes have their no, well, not that scripture, but he talked about the birds as far as his father feeding them. And I feed the birds now, and I, you know, put out waterfalls for them to take bird baths, and we watch them and we laugh at them, and, you know, we have fun, Lori and I, just sitting there listening to the birds. And they come by, and it's wonderful. It's a big blessing. And so all of these white containers that are on these staggered 3-step up and in the back is vegetables. We got veggies growing, you know, kind of container wise. So we're doing this year, which is the first year I've ever done it with these particular containers, we're growing veggies in the white containers and flowers in the painted containers, and then painting some also, changing them around. But you can see in the background that there's a fence back there. By the way, the fence had fallen down. I just put everything around it, and nobody knows that it's really fallen down. It's just standing. It's not really a fence. Oh well, nobody knows. They can't see. So it worked out to be a beautiful barrier, but in the winter it's beautiful because the evergreens stand out, and in the snow, and you can picture for yourself how it looks. And then this has been one of my newer projects, was that I had the arch here, and I wound up building a waterfall that was coming down over the flagstones, and I wound up getting free flagstones. I wound up getting free heavy-duty pumps, and I usually keep the water up to about here where it looks really gorgeous because it's perfectly clear. You can kind of see what it looks like. And for me, it's amazing because I want to do lights, you know, with the waters, but I haven't been able to. Can't afford them because we're retired now and we're on a fixed income. You know, boy. And it isn't like IRAs or anything like that. No, we're on straight Social Security. That's it. We ain't got a lot of money. We don't get a lot of money. But we got ways of living that we've cut our overhead so many times in so many ways that we can afford to live like how we're doing it. And then we could afford a few extras now and then. You know, like we'll get lice and we'll get this all fixed up and more dirt and more rocks, and things will be provided free, like an apple tree right there and some of the other fruit trees back there. And then my containers are still growing, you know, still bringing them in. And then this kind of wooden shack kind of thing, like I made into a semi-garage, you know, and you know, it was like, on the one hand, if I would have had money, I would have gotten a permit and paid money and had it inspected and built a garage and built all this and had to have permit after permit. But making a garden and making a yard, I didn't have to have a permit. It's a garden. So guess what? Magna Garden Cottage. That's what we got. And God equipped it for us to allow us to have a blessing at the end of my life. Because when I got saved, you know, I was sold out. I mean, I was way sold out. I was one of those freaky Jesus people. I mean, I was freaky. I mean, I was definitely a Jesus freak. I gave up everything I had. I lived in my wagon, you know, had no money most of the time. And when I did have somewhat of an income, it was because of disability more than anything else. And wherever God told me to go, I'd go. Wherever God said to do, I would do. And, I was, giving my life to God. And I had planned on never getting married, staying single for the Lord. Like most men, that didn't last long. But, hey, it was an interesting time in my life. But one of the promises God had made me, I told him that as I grew in the Lord, it was like within the first year of, maybe the second year of being saved, and right before I had major death and dying experiences with Crohn's disease, God said that when I was going through it, that I would not die, but that I would declare the works of the Lord. And that also, in my latter days, he would prosper me, because I had given away, oh gosh, God would tell me to give away money, and I'd go, I don't have any money. And then, somebody give me I'd have, some income, that I'd have a check, and then all of a sudden I'd be finding out that, one of my friends has no money for rent. So I would go pay his rent, in the Lord. And, that's radical extremism. And I don't recommend it unless God is doing it. Because if it is, it'll work out. Now, you could ask me, well, what happened when you did that? I slept on the street. What'd you think I was going to say? I inherited a mansion? Nah, not a chance. No, I wound up lots of times suffering the consequences of the actions that I did. But the interesting point of it being, I was thrilled at the time, being a young man. Oh, Lord, praise the Lord, I lost my apartment, but guess what? I did it because you told me to, and I know, God, that you've got me covered, and out here is so wonderful out in the park, just checking it out and going from park to park as the police keep telling me to move somewhere else, and I'm getting closer and closer to Calvary, and it's just wonderful. I don't have to go very far because I don't have any gas money anyways, and now I get a chance to study, and I'm totally dependent upon God, and I don't have any distractions whatsoever. And who needs to eat? That's the way I lived. But this Magna Garden Cottage is a inherited promise that God had given me for the faithfulness of what I had done in my younger days. And I didn't plan on it. I didn't look for it. I wasn't going to do it. And it just kind of like God dragged me to it. Because if you can, praise the Lord. I hope you're like, well, I know this one pastor I think is pretty cool. He's got a pretty cool testimony, pretty cool story. Mine's really radical, so don't go by me. But his is like, he went to Bible college. It's like, wow, and then he, like got hired at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and he was like, and became a pastor, and and his wife, he married his wife, and they had kids, and they're wonderful ministry, and he's right on, and I'm like, wow, man, most of the guys I met turned out to be real flakes. God saved them, is working on them, but they're like frosted flakes, and I was like, oh my God, are you really going to take that one to heaven, Lord? Are you really going to make it? Okay, just, I don't want to be around to see it. Because, part of what bugged me was that sometimes these frosted flakes that I had run into were, so dynamic at one time, and then you catch them at the wrong time. Ooh, ow. And it wasn't that I was mad at them, but the hurt that was caused to other people around them broke my heart, and that kind of what pulled me away from ever wanting to be a minister until I one day was dragged into it by God again. I was out busy working underneath the church, and I never recorded videos or talked about God. I mean, I talked about God to people one-on-one, but never in front of people. Never got up and gave a speech, never gave my testimony, never, it's like, blah, blah, blah. I got 4 spiritual laws down. I got, Roman road down. I got, this way of salvation down. I got the, gospel plan, and all the other things that, you hear about, you see about, you read about, and you talk about. But for me, what I discovered was that most of my life was spent doing the work without having to doing the word. So I would do the work, and then somebody come up and talk to me while I'm working, I would give them a word. It's kind of neat. Like I'm busy working underneath a church in a basement attic, or a basement. There we go. It's not a basement attic, but basement. And God's talking to me, and I kind of come back out, and there's some guy standing there, and I talk to him for a while. He's like, I'd like to have you come to our church and talk. I said, no, I don't think so. You go talk to the pastor. He's the one who does talking. But as it turned out, and I've told this on other tapes, so you could go listen to that because it's a long story on that one. But eventually I wound up in front of people, and I about blew my wife's mind. I'd love to say that I did it, don't get me wrong. When I was growing up, yes, I had been in, stage theater, like in high school. And I used to be in, band or choir and singing, so I sang in the choir, and later on I learned guitar a little bit, wrote some songs and stuff, and all the kind of things that I wanted to do, and it was for me, for me and the Lord. I mean, I wrote about I tell the story, I wrote 400 songs, worship songs to the Lord, I can remember about 40 of them. Maybe not more than that, but that's about it. But there are some pretty good ones too, I was like, it's kind of cool. So, what God had promised, He did. And that's where I'm at now with Magna Garden Cottage, is that I'm at the end of my life, and I nearly died a couple recently, in a massive trial and tribulation that I went through that was beyond my comprehension. I had gone through some death experiences and near-death experiences, and even near suicides, once or twice, in my early days. Wow. I never expected, with what I had been through, to be put into a position of actually getting to a place that was beyond my ability to stop myself. And I'd have followed through. And I'd love to tell you, as a older man of God, been with the Lord for so long, that, this is how God works, every time He's going to rescue you and deliver you and provide for you and take care of you. Man, you're going to die. So I'm going to tell you, sucker, you're going to suffer. It's a bitch. Pardon me, but that's what it is. And that's a female dog. Just so we keep it on the, up and up, But you ain't going to want to go where I've been, trust me. And I, had some ripped up, torn rotator cuffs in my shoulders, that had been re-injured. I had a neck injury that was, or narrowing in the neck that was causing some pain. I had thrown my back out, and that was causing pain. And then my knees were aching, and it's causing pain. And so they had me on a bunch of pain meds, which was all a good thing, but, they're also on other things, and were gradually working on all these different parts of my body that were pretty screwed up and trying to get me to where I could tolerate it. And at the same time, they were giving me information about what my wife's health was, and it kind of emotionally, exhausted me and wore me out until the place where finally one night in pain, I couldn't take it anymore. I was running out of pain med, I was running out of opportunities to be taken care of, I thought. My primary care physician is a very high credentialed nurse, and she's just amazing. She helps me set up specialists and doctors and stuff on my team that takes care of me. And I had come to the conclusion that, I couldn't take it anymore. I was already told that I had also, like a brain aneurysm, and I didn't know anything about those. And what I did learn scared the bejeebies out of me, because I didn't learn enough. I didn't learn the right information or allow it to develop slowly and become educated with it, but rather I was terrified. And so, middle of the night, I'm going, laying on the floor where I sleep on the floor, and I'm struggling with all the pain med. I'm gone. I've used up my last pain med. I'm not going to get any more for a couple of days. I got emergency call into my primary care physician. I've got, appointments still to come. But this one night, I said, I was out of it. I was leaving. I was, God, I can't take it. Nothing's working. Everything, not overdosing or anything, but high doses of lots of pain med and stuff, and trying to make it work. I mean, we're talking major pain med. Yeah, right. I'm not gonna tell you all this stuff. So what happened was that I said, if I can't find some position to just because I used to be able to, from the pain and from the exhaustion, pass out and sleep and recover till morning, and then I could get to where I needed to go, even though I was still in pain. So I told God, I can't find a place. I twisted this way, turned that way, bent this way, bent that way. Yeah, I have Crohn's disease, so that adds to it, and then arthritis and all the other junk goes along with that. And so I'm like trying to figure out a way out. And then suddenly, in my mind, I was down beneath the barrel, the bottom of the barrel. I was way down below that. And I said, if I can't get to sleep tonight, it's over. I'll be gone in the morning. I'll go out and shoot myself. I'll take care of this. It'll end. I can't take it. I know, God, but if you can't get me through the night, I'm sure you'll forgive me. I'm hoping you'll forgive me. I'm going to throw myself on your mercy, but I can't take this pain. I can't endure it. I just, and I'm bawling and crying, and then I'm exhausted, and I can't do that, and trying to twist and turn. Finally, somehow, in a really contorted way, I wound up in a lessened amount of pain to where I could sleep. Boom, passed out for about an hour, maybe 2 hours. And then woke up, and I got to my primary care physician, and I told her, my story, and she said, "Oh, don't ever do that again." She said, "We'll get you. We'll take care of you. You come to me. You get a hold of me. We'll take care of you." I was like, "Oh, okay. Far out. But then I was still like all shook up about this brain aneurysm thing. And that had me all messed up. So long story short is that I knew that I needed my support team to include a religious support team. I needed to get back to, I thought, a pastor, and he's a pastor of a church, and it's kind of a cool church. I've been going to it. I was blessed by it. I was very in agreement with everything he taught all the time, every time. I was shocked out of my gourd. And I said, honey, we need to go talk to this pastor, because I said, I can't deal with this. I said, I need to talk to Rich. And so, we decided that I was going to go on New Year's Day, right before I go see my neurosurgeon specialist. He was going to tell me all about my brain aneurysm and how bad it was and how messed up I was going to be. And I was trying to work through it. I was saying, well, I know that I can't deal with all these things if it ever piles up again. So I made sure I had my medical team ready, and I kind of, already know about psychologists and sociologists and, death and dying counselors and, I forget, hospice care and all kinds of things. So I, kind of assembled a team that I figured, well, if I get into trouble, here's what I'm going to do. But I'm in spiritual trouble, because if I had hit that bottom and I was willing to do it, I need to have somebody praying for me, and I need to have them, anoint me, and pray for me and lay hands on me and, get some kind of healing going, even if it's only spiritual, but it could be physical. You never know. God might do it. And so I decided to go see Rich, and we drove day and night, technically, maybe overnight or something, to get there from Utah to California. It's Calvary Chapel, Laguna Creek, over south of Sacramento. And showed up on a New Year's Eve service, and man, I was so at peace when I got in there. I was like, I never even got a chance to ask for prayer. I never even got a chance to tell anybody. I was going to tell them all about how I'm just in pieces, torn apart, wiped out, blown away. But I was so blessed by the teaching and so encouraged by just being there. It was like, whoops, oh well, I guess God didn't intend it. So I didn't say nothing. Guess what happened? Well, we left church. It was wonderful. I had a wonderful time, got in the car, drove back to Utah, and a week later, I had an appointment with the neurosurgeon. I went in, And the neurosurgeon said, "How you feeling?" I said, "Terrified." He said, "I'm not ready for what you're about to tell me." Now, you got to understand this. This is a chief neurosurgeon of Utah, University of Utah. He has buku credentials in Canada, buku credentials in the United States, buku credentials all over the place. This guy's a head honcho. I mean, he's like master or whatever in teaching and stuff, and does all this junk. So, he's kind of an interesting guy, So he says, "Well, come on over here." So he brings me over to his computer desk, on the screen, and he's showing me stuff. He says, "Well, this is your brain, I said, "Well, yeah, it kind of looks like it." He says, "Well, on your left side, you got this narrowing, of your veins, He says, "You really don't have much blood flow there." I was like, this is not good news. He's not starting off too well. But he says, "But over on the other side, he says, you got an increased blood flow." So he says, it kind of equals out, He says, "You don't know this, but this is the way, your body's done this, He says, "It's worked out, so it's okay." Then he says, "Now this is what, is your abnormality." He says, "Looks like a brain aneurysm." He says, "Not a brain aneurysm." I said, "What?" Well, I didn't say what. I was too, terrified by what I was being told anyways, and I could see it. And he showed it, the vein, and it was like abnormally designed and looked like what I saw pictures of aneurysms and looked like one of those types of aneurysms. He said, "No." He says, "It's common mistake by young people and by new surgeons and by, if you haven't seen one of these before or you haven't been around them enough, but once you take one out, you'll know that it's not an aneurysm, but that it was actually just an abnormality." Well, I knew I wasn't normal, but I mean, I had gone through, tortures of the dead, for how long, terrified of this meeting, didn't get a chance to pray with Rich and the elders, didn't get a chance to get any help. And all of a sudden, here I am, a doctor's telling me that I'm fine. He says, "Yeah, I'll see you in about 10 years. It took me a year. I won't lie to you. Yeah, it took me at least a month, to kind of really deal with the shock, Now, I got news for you. It could go either way, however you want to look at it. Either God made it work, or God knew it wasn't one. Now, God could have changed it, because I've had that happen in miraculous ways, not only on me, but other people, and then other times where it was just a mistake. I can tell you that if I had an MRI right now, I'd have some brain surgeons looking at me like they want to take out my aneurysm. Trust me, it looks like that. And yet here's this guy giving me all this reassurance, telling me, "No, it's no problem." And I think God may have tweaked it a little bit and made it into, from an aneurysm to an abnormality. That's just me and God. Sometimes he does those things because it's always been me and the Lord. Because this all goes back to something that happened at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. When I first got diagnosed, when I was first being taken care of at the VA's hospital in Long Beach, VA, and I was, I don't know, maybe 89 pounds, and I was really no blood and no fluids and high fever, and they packed me in ice, and I was dying, basically, and I had Crohn's disease, highly active. I would go into the hospital and stay for months at a time, in the VA. And the first time that I went in, it was back in 1976, at the Bicentennial, and I kind of, gave a call to Calvary, to have a visitation from pastors, send somebody over, help, I need help. I'm a Jesus freak, helps, Nobody came. Nobody. And as a matter of fact, my family didn't come. Nobody came. I went through some real interesting life lessons about how God can sometimes separate you and want you for himself to minister, or use somebody that's one of the most unusual people you might meet. At the time, I had this gal, that came in, and she noticed me for some reason. She wasn't a Christian, but she ministered to me anyways. And she gave me a book called The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. That kind of got me through it, because I was ready to off myself, at one point in time in the VA hospital. And that would have been easy there. No problem. They were halfway trying to kill you anyways. But having gone through that experience in my early Christian experience with God, then later in my life, I never expected to be so bad off that I couldn't deal with it. And I did. I found I couldn't deal with it. So now I'm kind of like sensitized more. I kind of feel like chopped liver. I'm not afraid of dying, but the misery part is kind of like, you really don't want to go through that stuff. So God blessed me with this house. He's blessed me in this state by having medical coverage, unbelievable, specialists that are incredible, people that are sensitive and caring and so intimate to me that I just, I trust them. I'm allowing them, into my life as people that care to help me, in my old age, but in my medical condition. And what happened was that God made me healthier than I've ever been in my life. I am better off ever, more prosperous, without any money, more blessed, you could say, without any church, more alive without any real, fluids. And all I'm really taking for Crohn's disease is vitamins. And yet, I still have problems with shoulders. I still have ripped up shoulders, and stuff like that. And if I try lifting cement anymore, because the cement slab I was trying to lift was about 200 pounds. So yeah, I tore my back out. But, it's my own fault. The things that happen to me now are more happening to everybody, whether you're my age or not, because I'm physically unbelievably fit. And so now, here I am, recording a video about this house that was a dump that has become a cottage. And here I am, a person who was once considered like, I don't know, a failure. I kind of look at myself and say, hey, I'm God's success. At least in my own mind. Maybe his. But I guess what I wanted to bring out in Magna Garden Cottage is that we are habitations. We are a vessel of the Holy Spirit. God can choose to use a dump like my house, a life like mine, and even my wife who just retired and she has no 401k left. We used it earlier, in our lives. No retirement accounts, no IRAs, nothing but just her Social Security. And I actually have gotten my Social Security. We're living off that. It makes no sense at all, and yet it does in some ways, because we become a blessing to all. Because of what God has done, no one else would believe it true.